Hi, this is just a recap of the last lecture that we had on sentences involving the verb sum and an introduction to numerals. So the first subject to recap is predicate nominatives. In order to really understand what a predicate nominative is, you have to think first about a normal Latin sentence involving an action verb. So let's take the king loves the queen. Rex amat reginam. So this is a typical Latin sentence form, right? You have a subject, rex, you have a verb, amat, and then you have a direct object, reginam. And the subject is in the nominative, and the direct object is in the accusative. So, rex amat reginam, the king loves the queen. Now, if you use the verb to be in a sentence rather than a normal action verb, it's going to be a deceptively similar kind of construction. So let's say we take rex est puer. Okay, so that says the king is a boy. And if you're paying attention carefully to the nouns rex and puer, you notice that rex is the subject and it's in the nominative, but you think puer, why isn't that puerum? Why isn't that in the accusative case? And the reason is that it's not a direct object. So a direct object is the receiver of the action. So in the sentence rex amat reginam, the king loves the queen. The queen is getting loved, right? And the king is doing the love. So this is a normal active form sentence. However, if you say rex est puer, this says the king is a boy. This is not something that the boy is not receiving some action from the king, right? The verb est is acting kind of like an equals sign, right? Another way to think about it is, in the first one, rex amat reginam, the king loves the queen. What you're saying is person A is doing some action to person B, or thing B, it might be. Okay, so you have A and you have B. The king and the queen are not the same. But if you say rex est puer, the king is a boy, the king and the boy are not two different people or two different things. They're the same. We're just using puer, boy, as a different way to describe the subject, the king, right? So rex est puer, in that case, puer is not going to go into the accusative case because it's not a direct object. It's going to go into the same case as the subject, the nominative, because you're just describing that king who's the subject in a different way. So that's what a predicate nominative is. And nominative comes from the word nomen, which means name in Latin. It also means noun. So a predicate nominative is really a predicate noun, okay? And that helps you to understand what a predicate adjective is, because it's very much the same kind of thing. In order to understand predicate adjectives, you need to remember what an adjective is, right? It's a word that modifies a noun. In other words, it describes a noun, right? So if you say a big dog, for example, and you make a noun-adjective pair, big is telling you what kind of dog it is, right? So remember the Latin rule about adjectives is an adjective agrees with the noun that it modifies in gender, case, and number. So if you have a subject that's in the singular and it's masculine, then you're going to put the adjective into the masculine form and the nominative case, and you're going to put it in the singular number so that it matches the noun that it modifies. So if you wanted to say good king, you'd say rex bonus if it was the subject. If you wanted to say good king and it was the direct object, you'd say regem bonum, because bonum is the masculine accusative singular form and it has to match regem. So that's the way you make a noun-adjective pair. Now a predicate adjective is very similar. It uses the verb sum, and it links, instead of linking one noun with another noun, rex est puer, it links that noun with an adjective, rex est bonus. So instead of the king is a boy, it's the king is good, right? So you still have to put bonus in the same gender, case, and number as the noun that it's referring to. So rex est bonus, the king is good. Bonus is masculine and it's nominative and it's singular. Or you could take another word, nomen est bonum. And nomen is a neuter noun and it's in the nominative singular. So nomen est bonum. Bonum has to match it in gender, case, and number. If you wanted to say the names are good, then nomina sunt bona, because bona, which might seem like it's feminine singular, is also neuter plural in the nominative number. So you've got to match these things even when they're not together in a pair, even when they're separated or linked somehow by est, because they're still adjectives and they're still modifying the noun, even if they're not together with it in a pair. Okay, so I want to talk also about, I want to remind you about Latin syntax. Syntax means word order. Okay, remember that word order in English is much stricter than word order in Latin. Most of the time in Latin you can put the words in any order and you can figure out what's going on because the endings will help you link them together, as well as a certain amount of common sense. So you could say rex est bonus, the king is good, or you could say rex bonus est, the king good is, which means the king is good. Or you could say bonus rex est, good the king is, which means the king is good. So you could play around with the order of the words, and as long as you have a sort of feel for the different kinds of ways that you can put them together in English, then you can sort of test them out and see what makes the best sense syntactically in English in terms of word order. Linked with the syntactical question, there's a translation question. Okay, so when you have the word sum and you have a simple sentence with sum, sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to translate it. And I'll give you an example. So suppose you said rex est, right? Then you started translating that. You say the king, that's the subject. Okay, est is, the king is. Okay, the king is. That might make some kind of sense in some strange circumstances, but it's really not a very good translation because you're not putting it together in a way that, in such a way that the English actually conveys a reasonable meaning to most English speakers' minds, unless you're saying something like the king exists, which is a rather rare thing to say. So remember that est by itself means he is, just like sum means I am, right? The form of the verb contains a pronoun subject. So est could mean he is, and then you could treat rex as a predicate nominative. So rex est would mean the same thing as est rex, right? He is a king, or he is the king, rather than the king is. So if you're having trouble translating a sentence with est, that's one thing that you can do. Here's another thing you can do. English sentences with that kind of structure often start with the word there. And it's kind of strange because when we think of the word there, it usually means, it's usually a sort of a pointer, right? It's talking about a place, right? So over there, the book is there, something like that. Right? But you can have an English sentence like this. There is a king, or there was a king, right? There was a king in the town, a sentence like that, right? So why do we use the word there? Because we're not talking about a place, if you stop and think about it. We're not talking about that. When we say there is a king, we're not saying the king is over there. We're just saying something about, we're starting to talk about a king is what we're signaling with the word there. And so in English, that's kind of a weird use of the word there, and they don't do that in Latin. So if you want to say there is a king, or there was a king, or there were two dogs in the house, if you wanted to say there was a king, you just say rex est, right? And you could say, oh, the king is, that doesn't make much sense, rex est. He is a king. That makes sense, but it doesn't work in the context. There is a king. Oh, that makes much more sense. So try those different ways of translating a sentence if you're puzzled and it's not really clicking, it's not really making sense, in order to come out with a translation that works. Okay, so we've talked about predicate nominatives, we've talked about predicate adjectives, we've talked about Latin syntax, and we've talked about different ways to translate sentences involving sum. We need to talk about one more related thing, which is what's called apposition with an A, not opposition with an O, but apposition with an A. It's a little bit like predicate nominatives. Apposition with an A is another way of redescribing something. Remember when with predicate nominatives, you add rex est puer, the king is a boy, or you could say the boy is a king. It might mean that. But boy and king are different ways of describing the same person, and so that's why puer, boy, doesn't go into the accusative. This is what we started out with. Okay, but suppose you said rex, comma, puer, comma, est laetus. Laetus means happy. Okay, so there you have rex, and that's in the nominative, and that's the subject, and immediately afterwards you have puer, right? And that's also in the nominative. So how are you going to make sense out of that? Because you have two nouns, both in the nominative, and they're not linked by and or something like that. So how do you translate it? Well, what's going on there is apposition. You're redescribing the subject. So you say, the king, a boy, is happy. So what you're saying is the king, you're talking about the king and redescribing him as a boy because he's also a boy. Maybe that's the reason why he's happy in the sentence, or it has something to do with it, right? So oftentimes when you have two nouns in the same case right next to it, you want to think of them as being an apposition. And that can work not just with subjects, but direct objects, right? So you could say the king loves the queen, a girl. It's going to be reginam, comma, puellam, because puellam is redescribing the direct object, the queen. You could do that with indirect objects. You can do that with objects of a preposition and prepositional phrases. So the point is you have a redescription of the thing that's in the same case as the original thing. That is apposition. Okay, last topic is an introduction to Latin numerals. Numerals and numbers are more or less different ways of talking about the same thing. So when I say numerals, I'm talking about numbers. When I say numbers, I'm talking about numerals. The first thing that you need to remember when you're thinking about Latin numerals is that there are, broadly speaking, two different basic categories that you need to remember. You may remember this from math or some other context. So there are two different kinds of numerals for our purposes right now. They are cardinal numerals and ordinal numerals. What's the difference? Well, cardinal numerals are counting numbers. Those are the ones that we think of as numbers ordinarily. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. Okay, so simple enough. That's cardinals. Ordinals are numbers which go in order. They're ranked numbers. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Those are ordinal numerals. Okay, so cardinals and ordinals, the two different classes of numerals for our purposes here. First thing to remember. The second thing to remember or to understand is that numbers / numerals function most of the time when we talk as adjectives. And that's true in Latin as well as English. So if that sounds confusing, just think about a normal adjective use. Big dog, slow dog, nice dog. Those are all adjectives modifying dog. 1 dog, 2 dogs, 3 dogs. Those are also adjectives describing dog or dogs. And the first dog, the second dog, or the first queens, the second queens, something like that. So whether it's cardinal numerals that we're talking about or ordinal numerals that we're talking about adjectives. And whenever we're talking about adjectives in Latin, that old rule about adjectives should come into your head. Adjectives agree with the nouns that they modify in gender, case, and number. Broadly speaking, though, when you speak about cardinals and numerals, cardinals and ordinal numerals, you should remember two rules of thumb. A rule of thumb, remember, is is a rule that doesn't always apply. Okay, so the rule of thumb goes like this. Cardinal numerals are indeclinable. Ordinal numerals are declinable. And I'll explain what that means. Okay, it means that if an adjective is indeclinable, it means that even though it's an adjective, you don't change the ending when you change the gender, case, and number. You keep it the same. So, for example, quinque means 5, right? And if you wanted to say 5 queens, you'd say quinque reginae. If you wanted to say 5 kings, you'd say quinque reges. Okay? What about if you wanted to say of the 5 kings? Well, if you wanted to say of the good kings, you'd say bonorum regum, because you'd have to put them both in the same gender, case, and number. But if you wanted to say of the 5 kings, you'd just say quinque regum. You wouldn't change the quinque like you change the bonus to fit. That's what indeclinable means. Okay, what about declinable? Well, declinable means it works like other adjectives and the endings change in order to keep the adjective in the same gender, case, and number form as the noun that it's modifying. So, for example, primus, or let's take, since we did quinque, let's take quintus, which is not 5, but 5th. So if you wanted to say the 5th queen, you'd look at the adjective, which is quintus aum, and it works just like bonus aum. So if you want to say the good king, you say bonus rex. If you want to say the 5th king, you say quintus rex. If you want to say the good queen, you say bona regina, if we're dealing with the subject in the nominative. If you want to say the 5th queen, you say quinta regina. So you have to match it in gender, case, and number. And just like with other adjectives, sometimes the endings will look the same, and sometimes they won't look the same. But whether they look the same or not, they still have to be in the same gender, case, and number. Okay, so the basic rule is cardinal numerals are indeclinable, ordinal numerals are declinable. There's one big caveat, which means may he beware in Latin. It's subjunctive, but in English we have the word caveat. A caveat means is an exception. So there's one big caveat and one big exception, which is that the rule about cardinal numerals being indeclinable only applies once you get past 3. So in other words, from 4 all the way up, including 4, the numerals are indeclinable. But 1, 2, and 3, the 3 first ones, are declinable. And not only are they declinable, but they don't work like a normal adjective paradigm that you might be used to. So let's take a look. Genies, on page 118, you'll see the 3 paradigms for unus, which means 1, duo, which means 2, and tres, which means 3. Okay, so there are certain similarities which you'll notice in these paradigms to the other adjective paradigms that you know, but for now I'm not going to ask you to memorize them. I'm just going to ask you, when you need to translate from Latin to English or English to Latin and you're not sure about the form, refer to the paradigms. There are also paradigms in a very convenient place, I think 489 and 90 in the back of the book. The same paradigms are there with all the other Latin paradigms, and I encourage you to look in the back of the book. So I think that's pretty much it. And thank you. You can always text me or send me an email if you need some help or you have a question. God bless.